Good afternoon and welcome to 3 o'clock with SOC. Give me a second while I welcome our Spanish-speaking neighbors. Buenas tardes. Gracias por estar con nosotros esta tarde en 3 p.m. con SOC. Si quieren acceso al programa en español, por favor marquen el número que aparece en pantalla, que es 425-436-6200. Cuando le contestan la llamada, por favor comparten el clave o contraseña, que es 627-682. My name is Tammy Rivera. I'm the Executive Director of Southside Organizing Center, SOC or SOC. Today, we continue our focus on the current protests and unrest due to police brutality here in our city and also in our nation. I want to let you know that all of our staff is available for you. You can contact us at 414-672-8090. You can email us at soc@socmilwaukee.org, and you can visit our website at www.socmilwaukee.org, where we have a full page dedicated to information, resources, and action you can take in response to COVID-19 or the coronavirus. I want to let you know before we get started with the program that we have a very meaningful lineup of subject matter experts and organizers and activists for you coming up, and we don't want you to miss it. Tomorrow with us is going to be Alderman Jose Perez and Alderwoman Jocasta Samaripa. We will be talking, the three of us, about reactivating the near Southside Emergency Peace Team. We've been working on this for about a week and a half. And so we'll be talking to you about what that is and how you can get involved as well. And then on Monday, we have Karen Rotker, an attorney with the ACLU. She'll be talking with us about the ACLU law settlement. Let's not lose sight of that very critical issue, and especially in these times, and how that ACLU law settlement names the Collaborative Community Committee as the oversight committee for the settlement. Sorry. And as you know, earlier this week, we talked about what the CCC is. And in a nutshell, if you missed that, the Common Council appointed a group of us, community leaders, to continue the work of the Department of Justice review of the Milwaukee Police Department and the Fire and Police Commission. And we took, about 2 years. There was a lot of obstacles we had to overcome to ensure that 45 hubs across the city of community residents, including 3 groups of those being police officer groups, could respond to the Department of Justice findings and give their suggestions on how do we problem solve with the issue that we're dealing very highly with today, which is community police relations. And so that committee needs to move forward. It's been stalled, and we're waiting on that to happen. And we have all confidence and are lifting up that work as a center hub of vehicle that we can move forward as a city to address the issue of community and police relations, in particular, police brutality. And so you don't want to miss that. And then we'll have Dr. Tony Baez, school board director, with us. And as you all know, long-term legacy civil rights leader. We'll have Dr. Rob Smith, Marquette University law professor and the director of the Center for Research, Teaching, and Outreach, again with us to talk about history of civil rights movements. And we'll have the Office of Violence Prevention. Before we get started with our guest, I want to share with you that we're really committed to ensuring we have a safe vote for our residents. Sometimes, because of the type of organization we are, or because of our different views, we're not able to sign off on everything everyone says here, even sometimes our own staff. And so the disclaimer I want to share with you is that the views and opinions shared today do not necessarily reflect those of SOC. With that, later on, after our first guest, we're going to hear from Claire Evers, Deputy Director of Environmental Health Department here, and she's going to give us an update on COVID. But our next guest, so happy that he's back with us. Really need his knowledge, his experience, and his insight. And so Ed Fallon, a law professor at Marquette University, is our featured guest today. So I welcome him on with us. And Ed is going to give us his response on the president's threat to override governors of the states in relation to the unrest. And then we're going to see if he has any thoughts about the state's response to the unrest, and in particular, the use of the National Guard and the state's sort of role and responsibilities in terms of law enforcement reform. So if we could bring on Ed Fallon, that would be wonderful. Looks like there was a little bit of a mix-up. Hola, Ed, welcome back.
Hola, good to be back. Hi, Tammy. Hello, everyone at 3 o'clock with SOC.
Problem earlier in the week. So we're going to see if Gabe can make something happen. She's working on our production, and I'm going to use our safeguard, Ed, and call you right away, just in case, so we don't lose any time.
Okay.
If you recall, one of the other times we had to use our cell phone to discuss, and so we really don't want to lose any time today on that. So I'm going to jump on.
Can you hear me now?
Right away. Just give me a second.
Maybe you mute me, Tammy. Maybe I'm muted with you.
Yeah, you all can hear him, but I can't, so I'm not quite sure what's happening. Hi, Ed.
Okay. Hi. Sorry you can't hear me, Tammy, but everyone else, hi. Happy to be here with you, and 3 o'clock with SOC.
Thank you, and thank you for your patience. We thought we were over the hump in technology, but I think everybody kind of jumped over to this technology when the other one was getting overloaded, and we might be getting to the saturation point here. Ed, so glad you're with us. Couple of topics for today. We're trying to understand the president's threat to override states as it relates to the unrest. That's one topic for today. And then the other topic is Wisconsin's own response to the unrest, in particular, understanding the use of the National Guard. And then if you're aware of, is the state have any role and responsibility in law reform, law enforcement reform? So, but if we could start with the topic about the president's reach and authorities in regards to these issues with states.
Sure, happy to. And let me know if you want me to hang up the phone if it's causing feedback. Well, I think what's important for our viewers to understand is that in the United States, the military, the armed forces, the Army, the Navy, is not authorized to take place in law enforcement, to have a role, an active role in enforcing the laws. And in fact, there's a law, it's called the Posse Comitatus Act. The word posse you might recognize from Westerns when there is, the sheriff gets a posse together. Well, it's the same word. But there's a law called the Posse Comitatus Act that says the military, the active military of the United States cannot assist in law enforcement. And it's very clear, and it's a very strong tradition in the United States. It's something that unfortunately our president doesn't seem to understand. And I think some of our viewers, if you come from Latin America, a Central American country, they don't have that tradition, they don't have that law. And so you often see military taking on law enforcement functions in Latin and Central America. But that's not the case in the United States. Now, this is different than the National Guard. The National Guard is basically the old-fashioned militia. If you go back to the Revolutionary War time, they are under the control of governors, and they are authorized to come out and help in natural disasters, in emergencies, including civil unrest. So, but that's under the control of the governor. And so the real issue here is, what can President Trump do against the wishes of governors? The governors have the National Guard. They can call it out and use it in their own state. No governor has agreed to allow President Trump to take over the National Guard. And therefore, what Trump is doing is arguing that under a separate law called the Insurrection Act, he can, on his own, take over the National Guard and also use the military forces to respond to protesters in the streets. And I'll just very briefly say, if he's invited to do that by governors, it's clear he can. And the general rule that military is not allowed to assist in law enforcement is overridden if the governors ask the president to help. No governor has done that. There is another exception if it is necessary to protect people's civil rights. And this goes back to the period after the Civil War, when southern states were abusing African Americans, were denying them their rights, the newly freed slaves. And in that case, the president can override governors and send in the military. But there is zero evidence that anyone's civil rights are being violated. In fact, the people in the streets are exercising their civil rights. They are exercising their right to protest. And so what I'll just finish with this and see if you have follow-up questions. What really this comes down to is another example of President Trump seemingly being willing to act first and worry about the legal consequences later. He may order military troops. He may invoke this Insurrection Act and say he's overruling the ban on military enforcing the law. He has a very weak argument. He doesn't care. He essentially is going to, if he does it, he would be daring the courts to overrule him. Go ahead, sue me. I bet you these federal judges will just roll over and let me get away with it. That's his operating procedure. He has not yet taken this course, and everyone should be clear. He has not yet issued an order invoking the Insurrection Act and saying that he's overruling the governors. If he tried to do that, he would be on very, very weak legal ground, but that may not stop him. And so that's sort of where we're at. We're once again confronted with a president who threatens things that are unlawful and may or may not ever follow through with them.
Lot to take in, but seems like it was more a threat than a planned action. We have yet to see, but begs the question. So if he could invoke to protect civil rights, conceivably, if local police are stopping persons from expressing their First Amendment rights or their right to assemble, could the National Guard theoretically be used to allow them to do that and protect them from law enforcement using excessive force to stop them from exercising that right?
Well, the rules are clear. When you bring in the National Guard, if you're a governor, or if you bring in the military, as President Trump is threatening to do, the rules are clear that any armed forces are subject to the control of civilian authorities. That means that the police are supposed to call the shots, and for the National Guard, the governor at the top of that, and not the military. The military is supposed to be serving the orders of local law enforcement. So that would immediately create a potential conflict and uncertainty. Yeah. If President Trump is giving direction to military forces and telling them to ignore local law enforcement that perhaps wants to be less confrontational. I mean, that's really what this is about, right? This is, there is no there's no credible allegation that we are in chaos and that the legal system is falling apart. What's really happening is you have local police and governors who are taking a less confrontational approach. They are allowing demonstrators to gather. They're allowing people to be out after curfew within reason. There have been, different states, different cities. Sometimes they've been trying to arrest people, but there are many states where local law enforcement have been allowing protesters to exercise their First Amendment rights. And Trump doesn't like that. He wants a more confrontational approach. But even if he brings in the military under this very weak legal argument, they're supposed to be under the direction of local law enforcement. And so, again, that would create a very uncertain situation where he is telling the military to ignore the people they're supposed to be listening to, the local police, the local sheriffs. It's another example of a president who really doesn't care about the law and is really just concerned with doing things the way he wants and let the consequences follow later. We'll get sued, people will scream and yell. It's too late, we'll have already done it. That's his way of operating. And it's unfortunate because it really does create huge strains on the legal system. And it's even creating strains within the military. We've seen today former Defense Secretary James Mattis being critical. The current Secretary of Defense is trying to push back. And you've got dissent within the military now. People who don't want to be used the way Trump wants to use them and who know it's illegal. And so he's fracturing the military and fracturing their morale. And that's another example. He doesn't care. He really doesn't care.
It's unfortunate. We're at least not seeing that action taken right now. I'm going to ask if our viewers have any questions while you get ready to respond to the state's authority in invoking the National Guard and their role and responsibility in law enforcement reforms and protections for citizens. So folks, we have Ed with us. This is the time to ask all the questions and concerns you've been sharing with us. And so we invite you to do that. Hola, Uriel. And so please do while Ed informs us about our state's actions, roles, and responsibilities.
Yeah, and the National Guard is different than the active military. So these are, we call them our citizen soldiers or part-time soldiers. The National Guard is often called out by the governor of a state. They are under the control of state authorities, and they are called out for natural disasters, floods, wildfires, and they have been over our history oftentimes called out at times of civil unrest, rioting, to protect neighborhoods that have been subjected to looting. So that's a whole different situation. Now, it's important, the National Guard, they're under the direction of the governor, not President Trump. And they have specific training in domestic unrest situations. They are not full-time soldiers. They do not approach a gathering of people like they're in Fallujah in Afghanistan. They're not trained in that kind of confrontational warfare. I mean, they do have military training, of course. They can be sent overseas, but primarily they are outside of the control of President Trump. The only exception is in the District of Columbia. In the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. is under the federal government's control. They have a mayor, but the reality is Congress and the president control the District of Columbia. And President Trump is the ultimate authority over the National Guard for the District of Columbia. That is the only National Guard unit in the entire country that President Trump does have ultimate authority over. And I think that that's why when he talks about bringing in the military, it's very clearly his idea to do an end run around the National Guard, because that means he would be able to control what's happening. And that's what's caused so much concern It's extremely rare in our nation's history for that to happen. And it usually has to happen if the governor of a state asks the president to bring in the military. President Trump doesn't have that, so he's looking for some very weak arguments that he can do it against the wishes of governors. And that's what's causing a great deal of concern around the country.
Now we have a question from Drea. What are the rights of citizens to be able to see military ID if they're used, or MPD badges? Because we've heard some reports that the police officers are not having those available for folks. What is the obligation there?
A couple of things. That's a good question. There are other federal agencies that have apparently been mobilized in Washington, D.C. Officers at the Bureau of Prisons, who are usually prison guards. Enforcement officials from the Drug Enforcement Agency, who by law are limited to enforcing drug laws and similar laws, not to being used for policing protests. And ICE agents, who normally would enforce our immigration laws. There are reports that many of these federal law enforcement officers from many different agencies have been mobilized and called out to assist with crowd control, and that they are not wearing any kind of uniform or identifying markers. And that is incredibly worrisome. When you are protesting, you do have a First Amendment right of free speech, and that includes the right to film any law enforcement officers or any National Guard that are there. And so if you are confronted, you certainly can take out your cell phone, or people who are with you can take out their cell phone and record the confrontation. I would not necessarily recommend seeking an ID or challenging someone to produce an ID. I think that goes down the road towards sort of escalating back and forth that you want to avoid. I think if you are protesting and you have law enforcement confront you, first thing you should do is if they're asking you to move, go ahead and move. Comply with a command. If it's to get off a street or to stop blocking, go ahead. But if they're asking you to disperse or go home and you don't want to, you do have a First Amendment right to protest, to film. They may arrest you. What is often happening is that people who are being arrested for protesting past curfew, or simply protesting vigorously during the day, if they are arrested, oftentimes no charges are ever brought. The charges are dropped. They're basically just putting you in handcuffs, taking you, processing you, and the charges are dropped. You may spend a night in jail. Not a great environment, not a lot of fun, but it doesn't lead to criminal prosecution. I would not recommend protesters confronting law enforcement and asking to see an ID, because they're going to say no, and then it's going to get back and forth, and it could escalate. Simply say your piece, comply with lawful orders to the extent possible.
And are they under any obligations to have their identification clearly marked? Are there any?
Well,
or is that more of a standard operating procedure issue with our local fire and police commission?
Local fire, police, sheriff's deputies are under an explicit obligation to have identification that is viewable and to provide identification if asked for it. The difficulty is you've got these federal agencies that aren't even supposed to be enforcing the law. They're not even supposed to be there. So to my knowledge, there is no affirmative obligation to show identification because no one expects them to be there in the first place. If you're a prison guard and you've been called out to the streets to assist in crowd control, no one thinks that's the job of a prison guard. I haven't looked, but I'd be willing to bet with some high degree of certainty that there is no regulation telling a prison guard if he encounters a member of the public, he has to show his ID, because that's not his job. So the difficulty is in putting people in situations where they're not supposed to be. And that's what's creating all of this uncertainty. We know how local police are supposed to behave. We have plenty of experience with local police and protesting crowds. In the District of Columbia, they have protests all the time, every day. And local law enforcement knows how to deal with crowds. But when you take them out of the equation and you replace them with these federal agents, a different group, they don't have experience, they don't have training. That's where we're seeing so many problems and so much concern.
Are you aware of any of those type of non-traditional police officers being dispatched locally?
I am not aware. I think in Wisconsin, to my knowledge, Governor Evers has kept control of the situation with the National Guard and has not requested any federal assistance. And quite frankly, I think that's the way it should be. I think that local state leaders, local city leaders should be accountable. And you should not have a situation where agents from federal agencies who are not accountable to the local government attempt to get involved. I have no knowledge of any federal agents in the state of Wisconsin who have been involved in any crowd control efforts.
So one quick last question here. Do our officers who don't show their badge and are acting in a way that folks suspect is not within their right, are we able to report them?
Yes, and I think we have in Milwaukee, in the city of Milwaukee, the Police and Fire Commission, which handles complaints against law enforcement and other first responders, and does have disciplinary power and authority. And I think you have in the sheriff of Milwaukee County, I think you have an individual who is very responsive to community concerns and a true advocate of community policing, the close relationship between law enforcement and the community they serve. My recommendation, if you feel that there are local law enforcement, Milwaukee police or Milwaukee County sheriffs who are not behaving appropriately in their response to a protest, my recommendation is to use your phone, record the interactions. Do not try to escalate the situation. If you are able and willing to move back, do so. If they give you an order simply to get out of the way, to move to a different location, do so. If they're behaving inappropriately, film it. And you have every right to do that.
And use that evidence for your report. We have about 4 minutes left. Ed, can you tell us what responsibility does the state have in ensuring that law enforcement reform and these things and intervening in police brutality? Is there any responsibility or roles there?
The state obviously has a huge responsibility in making sure that the police force serves everyone and is not discriminating against various ethnic or racial groups and is not enforcing the law differently. The difficulty we have at a local government level is that the police union can be very strong politically, very influential politically in terms of mobilizing against candidates they don't like, whether it's district attorney or mayor. And sometimes local government cannot overcome the political power of police unions. Under the Obama administration, the US Department of Justice under President Obama worked to bring federal pressure to get local law enforcement to reform their policing practices because the state and local leaders didn't have the political muscle to take on the police unions. And that was effective under the Obama administration. One of the first things President Trump did as president is he began dismantling that civil rights effort from the Justice Department, taking away the federal pressure to reform local police. It's a very complicated issue. You've got entrenched practices and training that really needs to be addressed and changed. You need a wholesale sweeping out of some law enforcement agencies. I'm not necessarily talking about Milwaukee or Milwaukee County. I'm talking nationwide. There are some cities that need a wholesale sweeping out of officers and change, but it's very difficult to do that at a local level because of the power of police unions to resist change.
Now that begs the question, I'm going to steal about 2 minutes, which is when the union busting occurred here in Wisconsin, the police and fire unions were left out of that union busting for the sake of argument of all the former terms. Explain to us how that was possible.
It was possible because the lobbyists from the police unions cut a deal with the Republicans in the state legislature. And so in return for votes and political support for Republicans, the union got what they wanted, which was Act 10 did not apply to them, and they could continue to engage in their same practices and have the same protections they always had. So they got immunity from Act 10, essentially. So that's just an example of police unions using political power. And, you know, we're talking about law enforcement has to serve the entire community, Back in the day, police officers could be required to live within the city of Milwaukee. Now they can live outside the city and come in. It breaks that chain of connection between law enforcement and the surrounding community. And unfortunately, the political lobbying of the union also breaks that chain of connection between them and the community.
And there aren't any statutes that require full, applies to all unions. Was there a loophole that allowed that, or that was just an exception that they were willing to write in?
The way Act 10 was written, it did not apply to the police union. That was the only union it did not apply to. So
it was only the police union, not the fire? I don't remember now.
You're testing my recollection,
That's
but
okay.
my recollection, it was only the police and not the fire.
Okay. And then just to connect for folks, a piece that Ed was sharing there, the Department of Justice review of the Milwaukee Police Department and actually the Fire and Police Commission, that work after that draft report was created and handed to former Chief Flynn. It got leaked in the battle to not release it and to respond. And so I just want to remind folks that we've also been talking about this week, which is very relevant to the day's unrest, that the Common Council appointed a committee, the Collaborative Community Committee, of which I sit on the executive committee, to continue the Department of Justice work. And what we did was held 45 hubs across the city to get input from residents on how to problem solve this community police relations. And so right now, folks, if you want to make sure that we have efforts going forward, one of the things that you can do is support the continuance of that committee. And it seems like the rational, a valuable center to focus our hard work that's ahead of us in law enforcement reform and community police relations. And right now, that's before President of the Council, Common Council, Chevy Johnson, who on this program and previously had committed to ensuring all the appointees are on so we can continue that work. But that's just to connect that national work to what we're doing locally. Thank you, Ed, for being with us. So valuable, an ally and in the struggle, but the wisdom that you share legally has been of great value to us, and we very much appreciate it.
Well, it's a pleasure, Tammy, as always. Hope to see you soon.
All right, be safe. Folks, if you have any questions or comments or concerns that you weren't able to ask during Ed's time with us, we are collecting, as we do for many issues, your questions, your concerns, and the suggestions you have for us moving forward in problem solving. With that, we don't want to forget that we have so many other things happening in the community. The unrest is critical, and I hope that you all, along with us, participated in the moment of silence for George Floyd that took place across the nation, 3:45 p.m. Eastern time. For us, it was 2:45, for the almost 9 minutes that were used to take his life from him, from the police officer who did so in Minneapolis. And so our thoughts and prayers are with his family and friends, with the nation, and with our local community as we try to also work forward from the killing of Joel Acevedo, the stop and frisk, the illegal cavity searches, all of the struggles we've had in with police brutality and community and police relations. And so we don't want to forget that. We have a couple of things we're still having to address. And we cannot forget about that, including our COVID-19 quarantine and working towards becoming safer. So with us again, very grateful to have her with us, Claire Evers. I hope I get her title right, which is the Deputy Director of Environmental Health for Milwaukee. And if we could have her on, she's going to give us an update. Hola, Claire. Thank you for being with us again.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, we can't lose sight of what's happening. So we're so happy you're with us. Marlene, thank you for making sure that Claire can be with us. And I'm going to turn it over to you so that you and Claire can get us all up to date on our coronavirus.
Thank you, Tammy. Hi, Claire. It's great to have you on again. So Claire is actually the Deputy Commissioner of Environmental Health at the City of Milwaukee Health Department. She's here with us to give us an update on COVID-19 related information, specifically regarding the south side of Milwaukee and the current phase that was just released by the mayor. So can you speak to us about COVID-19 numbers on the south side of Milwaukee and any updates regarding that?
Sure. So the latest update regarding the south side, so specifically in zip code 53215, that has had the most cases to date. A total of 1,544 confirmed cases are in that zip code. And then the second highest zip code is 53204, which has the second highest number of cases, which is 1,021. So we are seeing an increase in this population. It went from cases in the Hispanic population increased from 16% to 38%. And so that community is very impacted by COVID. And when we try to look at the reasons why this community might be more impacted than others, possible driving factors include maybe limits to access to healthcare, increased likelihood of hourly work, being unable to telecommute, into coming into contact with large amounts of people. And then these social, environmental, and institutional factors also contribute to higher rates of morbidities in this community, which may make them more susceptible to COVID and the probability of more severe symptoms with COVID.
Well, thank you for that informative information. So my next question for you, Claire, is in March, it was released that we are in phase 2 right now. So the mayor just released information about phase 3. Can you tell us more about that and
Sure.
what that entails?
Sure. So in March, when phase 2 was issued, we had said we'd evaluate the data, the gating criteria in 2 weeks, 14 days, which is the incubation period for COVID. And if we were at least to the yellow, meaning that things are going in the right direction, we could move to the next phase. And that didn't happen last week. So we reevaluated today, and the criteria have been moving in the right direction. So we were able to issue order number 3 today, which will be effective tomorrow at 2:30. That does open up a lot of areas. So probably most exciting for people is that restaurants and bars will be able to be open for on-site dining. The restriction will be 25% capacity. So then we know that there is the ability to maintain social distancing. And there are safe business practices in place to ensure that consumers and employees are safe at that limited capacity. Additionally, childcare providers will now be allowed to have 50% capacity, which is another good move in the right direction. And then another huge one is gatherings. So our gathering limit for churches, funerals, weddings, any gathering was at 10. So that's based off of the CDC guidance. We are using CDC guidance again in this phase, and we are having that number move up to 25% capacity or 250 people, whichever is lesser of the two. So that's really going to solve some conflicts we had with large gatherings. People really wanting to maintain safe in their areas, and so now we are able to open that up. There still are safe business practices and social distancing in place, but we feel comfortable that we've moved in the right direction enough to slowly move forward and open these things up a bit.
Wow, that's awesome. So we're moving in the right direction.
Moving in the right direction. So we are in phase 3, and then in 14 days, we'll take a look at the data again. If the data is either consistent or even getting better, we can move on to phase 4. If it's not, we may stay in phase 3 for a while to see, with all these large gatherings that have happened with the demonstrations, we don't know how that's going to affect our numbers. A lot of people were being safe, wearing masks and keeping their distance, but some people weren't. And so we don't know what that's going to look like. And a lot of it was outdoors. We don't really know how this virus acts outside. So only time will tell. So we will continue to look at the data, and hopefully we continue to move in the right direction.
Oh, okay. That's great. So what phase criteria is apparent when comparing last week's COVID numbers to this week's, like this upcoming week?
Sure. So until today, like last week, we were red in the number of cases and testing and tracing. And so when we look at the number of cases, we're looking at the percent positive. So we want to maintain a negative trajectory. We want the numbers to be consistently going down, or at least not up, in order to either stay in yellow or go down to green. And then our contact tracing, there was a very large lag in the National Guard testing to be able to do our contact tracing. A lot of the tests kind of sat in this staging place in the electronic system from the state. So now that they have been released, we're able to actually do that contact tracing, which contact tracing is when a public health nurse calls somebody who is positive and talks them through where have you been, who have you been in contact with, so then they can then call their contacts. So one of the measures is we have to be able to address those positive cases within 24 hours. And so all of our numbers now are in the yellow. So we're looking good.
All right. Are there any resources individuals can use to get updates on COVID-19?
Yes. So we have several places that people can go. And I believe that they're going to put the website up. It is milwaukee.gov/MMFS. It's for moving Milwaukee forward safely. That's where you'll find our orders, our current orders, and the gating criteria and where we stand. There's also milwaukee.gov/coronavirus, and that's where you'll get general coronavirus information. And lastly, we launched yesterday a new email. It is askmhdcovid@milwaukee.gov. And that's where you can email any questions you have, like, can my establishment be open? Or I went out to eat and they had more than 25% capacity. Anywhere you have concerns or questions, you can direct them to that email, and then it will be forwarded to the right person to answer for you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for that update. I feel like it was really necessary for the time being, and we'd love to have you on again as our main update for COVID-19.
Sure.
We have a few questions we want to trickle in here before you leave, Claire.
Sure.
A question from Clary. Is there a way that a person with a negative test can have that faxed to their employer so they can return the work?
So I'm not exactly sure the process is. If this is with the National Guard testing, I'm assuming that's what the person is requesting. They can call 211 and they can talk to one of those, are usually public health nurses who answer the call, and they can work on getting something for them to have their employer send. I know if you go to a primary care, that you can easily do that. The problem is that with the National Guard testing, they would have to sign a release to send the form to the doctor. So they'll have to get it sent to them first, then to their employer. So they can call 211.
Are they giving that evidence to residents if they test negative? Are they giving them documentation?
I don't think so. I think they're just giving them a phone call.
Gotcha.
And so if you need that documentation, if you call 211, they would be able to direct them how to get it. Because I think right now they're just doing phone calls or texts, or they are now starting this week sending a letter too.
Okay, we have one last question we're going to take here. Now that we're in phase 3, is there a plan for city inspectors? This is Drea asking again. Is there a plan for city inspectors to check on businesses to ensure that they're complying with the standards, but also the other CDC guidelines?
Sure. So right now we are about to phase our food inspectors back out into restaurants and bars. And so they will be able to identify if anyone is violating the Safer at Home or the Moving Milwaukee Forward safely orders. We don't have capacity to go into every business, but what we have been doing, which is working very well, is the community is notifying us if they see someone who's not complying, which, you know, being reactionary isn't the best way to be all the time, but we're working with what we have and the capacity we have. So when we do get notified that there's a concern, we do have staff that go out then. We'll have them make a call. We'll have them go either do a FaceTime inspection or go do an in-person inspection. So we do encourage anyone, if they do see someone not complying, to let us know. And then we do have inspectors going out to the...
And if they are not in compliance, what's the process that businesses have to take to be in compliance? And at what point will they be closed until in compliance? I want to check and see if folks are able to hear you, Claire, because I can't.
Somehow, yep, so I'm sorry, somehow I got muted.
Okay, so go ahead and will you start that again? What's the process?
Sure. So for anything new, we like to take an educational approach. We don't want to come down too heavy-handed right away. So all the establishments that this is new, that they can open up for 25%, if we have a concern or a complaint, we will make a phone call, make sure that they understand what the requirement is, and then follow up with an inspection later. And then when we get to that inspection, if they are not in compliance, then they would be issued a citation. And if there's continued non-compliance after that, we do have the ability to revoke licenses. I would certainly hope we would never get there. A lot of the non-compliance we've seen so far with establishments as we slowly reopen, it's just because of a misunderstanding of the regulations, and they do come into compliance voluntarily. And that's really what we're hoping for.
Well, that's great to hear. Thank you. And thank you, Marlene, as well. Be safe. We'd like to share with you, as to not forget, a census video. We have to be counted, folks. It impacts us for the next 10 years. It impacts our representation. It impacts the resources we're able to get.
Every student is full of possibilities, just like every community, which is why the 2020 census wants to make sure we are all counted. Because an accurate census count can help inform funding for things like after-school programs and education for the next 10 years. Let's stand together. Let's make it possible.
Shape your future. Start here. Learn more at 2020census.gov.
And on the heels of that promotion to inspire you to be counted, especially graduates be counted, I'm going to ask Marisol to come on and share our special promotion for our gift card for those of you who want to participate in our graduation promotion.
Submit a census-related graduation photo to enter to win a $50 gift card and to be featured in our Class of 2020 slideshow next Friday, June 12th. Be as creative as you'd like, as long as it's related to the census in some way. Submit your 2020 census graduation photos to soc@socmilwaukee.org, SOC@socmilwaukee.org. Get those photos in by next Wednesday, June 10th. Thank you and congratulations to all of our neighborhood graduates.
Thank you for that video, very helpful. We want to say some quick hellos before we close out the program and see if we had any dangling questions that we'll need to get back to you on. I said hello to Uriel earlier. Hola, Maria Gallegos. And hola to Jetty. Oh, good to see you, Jetty. Was wondering where you were. Hello, and you're welcome. So, folks, I want to remind you, you don't want to miss the program that we have for you tomorrow. Both Alderman Perez and Alderman Samaripa are going to be on with me, and the three of us are going to share with you how we reactivated the Near Southside Emergency Peace Team, our thoughts about how to address the root causes of the issues we're dealing with, community police relations and police brutality, and how we want to try to maintain the peace that we have in our neighborhoods. Monday, you don't want to miss. We have Karen Rocker, attorney for the ACLU, who's going to be sharing the ACLU settlement for us, reminding us of those requirements and how they relate to naming the CCC, the Collaborative Community Committee, as the oversight committee for that law settlement. And then we have legacy leader, Dr. Tony Baez, who is also the school board director with us, who's going to share about the history of the civil rights movement and similar protests and unrest that led to change. And we have Dr. Rob Smith, professor at Marquette University and the director of the Center for Research, Urban Research, Teaching and Outreach, and the Office of Violence Prevention. We're bringing to you our top leadership and original source information to help you understand what's happening and have more tools as you engage civically and to make change. I got an emergency alert on my phone I want to share with you right now. As of 10 p.m. tonight, the Milwaukee County bus service will be suspended until the morning. Service Friday, Saturday, and Sunday will also be suspended at 10 p.m. There'll be continuing updates. So folks, if you're needing to get to work or any other place and you were relying on our public transit system, unfortunately, it is not going to be available for you all. And you'll have to make some other arrangements. If you're not happy about that, please contact your elected officials and let them know so that they can work on other solutions as well. So we'd like to remember today we observe a moment of silence for in honor of George Floyd's memorial service. Our thoughts and prayers are with his family, his daughter, and the rest of their family. We want to share our continued solidarity with our brothers and sisters who are protesting while we are working on producing this daily program. And we don't want to forget about you residents and friends who are dealing with the challenges of the coronavirus and the loss of folks to COVID-19, as well as the stress that comes with all of those of you who are currently tested positive, and the rest of the community who has been so highly impacted and traumatized in so many ways, including economically. And so thank you for sharing this time with us. We hope it was helpful to you. Please fill out our daily survey. It only takes 5 minutes. The link is in our comments. Thank you again, and we want to leave you with the thank yous for our funding partners who make this possible for us to bring to you our programs and services. Be safe, and we'll see you tomorrow at 3 o'clock with Sam.
Thank you to our sponsor, Wisconsin Boys, Community Development Block Grant, Neo Philanthropy State Infrastructure Fund, Mudman Board Project, Catholic Campaign for Human Development, Silver Foundation, City of Milwaukee Office of Violence Prevention, Thai Foundation, City of Milwaukee Promised Son, all the faithful individuals who support SAC through the personal donation. Thank you, thank you, thank you.